on video. So welcome everyone to Authors Talks. Today we have Chris Guillebeau, who's here with us to talk about his book, The $100 Startup. And essentially, Chris comes to us as a writer, a world traveler. He has gone to 160 countries, a couple more left on the list. He's also an entrepreneur and lifelong learner. So in addition to his book, Chris is also the author of his blog and site, The Art of Nonconformity. It's a great site to check out. Today, Chris is going to talk about how anyone can start their small startup where you can commit little time or money, maybe $100 or so, and wait to take the real plunge when you're sure it's successful. And the best part is, if we can change our own life, we can help others change theirs, which I think is a great sentiment. So please welcome Chris. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Great. Thank you so much, Rachel. Thanks, Googlers, for having me, both those who are here and those who are watching. It's fun to be back. I was at the Mountain View campus last time for my first book, The Art of Nonconformity, and it's fun to come and talk about the $100 startup. In the cab on the way over, all of a sudden I had this surge of guilt as I was reminded that I haven't updated my Google Plus page in a couple of weeks. I was like, oh shit, I feel really bad. I have to come and apologize and beg forgiveness. I can take the mic out? Great. So first of all, my apologies for that. And second of all, I don't want to lecture for a long time. Thought I'll just talk a little bit about why I wrote the book and what the $100 startup is about. Tell you a couple of stories from it, a little bit more about the model and what I hope will come out of it. But then we'll do questions and attempted answers, QAA, which sometimes goes better than others, but I'm sure at Google it'll be great. And then we'll just hang out if anybody wants to hang out. I know lots of you guys have to get back to work. So first things first, whenever you undertake a big project, hey guys, come on in. Whenever you undertake a big project, whether in business or anything else, I always think it's good to define your own success. I always think it's good to decide for yourself what success is going to look like, as opposed to someone else deciding for you. And in the case of writing a book, it's really good to understand to whom you're writing, to understand who's the audience for this message. And it takes a lot of work to write a book, so who do you really hope to reach with that? And there's a long tradition in publishing of authors complaining about their publishers, but unfortunately I had a very good relationship working with Crown on this book. And so it's not so good for drama, but it is good for the editorial content of the book, because in the beginning of the research process, I got some really good advice from my editor. And my editor said, Chris, you use this word entrepreneur a lot on your blog and in your writing. And maybe in some of the circles that you travel in, maybe online with your blog, maybe elsewhere, some people understand what you're talking about. But for a lot of mainstream America, they have their own conception of what entrepreneurship is. And a lot of people are actually intimidated by the idea of entrepreneurship, and not everyone's necessarily interested in entrepreneurship. And for a lot of people, when they think about entrepreneurship, they tend to think of the Silicon Valley model, and they think of kind of moving and kind of banding together to form a real company and pursuing angel investing or venture capital. And that's one model of startups, but that's not really what the $100 startup is about at all. And then sometimes when people think about business, quote unquote, they think about things like wearing a suit every day, or playing golf, or voting Republican, or all these different things that you might associate with traditional, larger business. And that's not what the $100 startup is about either. So essentially, this book and a lot of what I do with The Art of Nonconformity, it is for those who are seeking freedom. And it's for those who are hoping to have more freedom and independence in their lives, whether it's people who are dissatisfied in their work, people who have jobs they don't like, obviously no one at Google, but other companies elsewhere, people are dissatisfied and they want to make a change, but they don't necessarily know how to make that change, and they don't necessarily know what the next step is. And so there's a lot of resources that are kind of general, motivational, encouraging people to go for it. And I think that's great. But when you're ready to go for it, the next question is, where are you going and how do you get there? And so my hope with the $100 startup was to provide 300 pages of next steps and a very specific model of checklists and case studies, a very data-driven approach based on this extensive study that would tell people exactly, what to do and how to do it to establish, their own small business. And the second group of people that I'm writing for in the book are those people who are just now entering the job market, either just right out of college or those who are unsuccessfully trying to compete in a difficult job market, people of all ages. And right now we have a situation where a lot of people, in many cases, are competing for few jobs. And I don't know entirely what the situation is here. I don't think it's quite as bad in the Bay Area, but where I live in Portland, Oregon, it's not unusual at all to go to the coffee shop and your barista who makes your coffee has a master's degree, or sometimes higher, And so it's not unusual at all to find all kinds of people who have, this higher education, but they're not able to find work in the field in which they've trained. And it used to be when we meet people like this, we might think that they've fallen on hard times, or we might even think something's wrong with them. They're not trying hard enough. They should just work harder. They should, get on LinkedIn, polish their resume, whatever. But I would suggest when we have situations like last year in Portland, there was a job announcement for an entry-level receptionist position. It paid $14 an hour with no benefits, and 300 applicants showed up, to apply for that job and interview. And many of them had college degrees. So essentially everyone is qualified or very overqualified, for that kind of job. And I would suggest when we have situations like that, the answer isn't just try harder, for those people. I would say that the answer for many of them is actually found through creative self-employment. And the answer is found through kind of, taking matters into their own hands, and making something for themselves that improves the state of the world. And this used to be seen as kind of a risky thing. Entrepreneurship used to be seen as kind of the scary, risky choice. And there might be a lot of reward on the other side, possibly, but there's certainly a lot of risk. And I think, during a difficult economy, a lot of people are reevaluating that and thinking about where their security really is found and what really is risky and what is really safe. And for a lot of people, especially if you can start a business without investing a lot of money and without, spending a lot of time in the planning stage, I think in many ways that's actually the safe, conservative choice. So that's the message that I'm, hoping to bring to people through the book. And the best way to tell you more about the $100 startup model is to tell you a couple of stories from people who are in the book. So when we began the research process, I was traveling all over the world, cast a really wide net and said, I want to hear from people from all different backgrounds, from all different countries, different ages, operating different kinds of businesses, who had all successfully found this freedom, who had all found this independence, through starting a successful business. But we also had very specific characteristics. So we said that the business has to make at least $50,000 a year, and in many cases it made a lot more, but we just established that as the baseline so that we're not looking at hobbies, we're actually looking at real small businesses. And the business owner had to provide very specific financial information about how much money they made and how much it cost to start the business, mistakes along the way, what went well, if they scaled that business, how do they do it? And again, the goal with that was to provide a very specific resource as opposed to a general resource. Because often if you ask someone how their business is doing, assuming it's a private company or a very small business, they might say, oh, it's going well, but you have no idea what that means. So we wanted to be very specific about that. We also looked primarily at micro businesses or businesses that have 5 or fewer employees. So I really am looking at this very, very small startup model. And in most cases, or let's say at least half the cases, the business owners were solopreneurs. So people who were just running their business as one person, maybe a virtual assistant or something, but essentially it was just themselves. And then lastly, we were looking primarily at people who started this business without a lot of advanced technical skills or without a lot of special skills that couldn't be somewhat easily acquired. So for example, we talked with a guy who opened a coffee bar. And he, before he did that, he didn't know much about running a coffee bar, but he was able to acquire that knowledge. On the other hand, I had someone submit a survey from Croatia who said that he had taught himself dentistry. And I said, that's great, that's awesome, good for you, but I'm not going to put that in the book because I'd probably get sued. So again, no special skills, or at least no skills that couldn't be, somewhat easily acquired. So we received maybe 1,500 submissions, lots of data and surveys, and then from there kind of narrowed down to the 50 to 70 most interesting or most poignant stories that I felt kind of reflected the times in which we live. And then that's constructed around a narrative in the book that tells the story of how these people, found that freedom through small business, and then, hopefully a blueprint for how readers can do the same thing. And one of the first people that I talked with, in fact, the book begins with the story of Michael Hanna. And Michael was a 25-year veteran sales professional. He worked in media sales, and he'd always been a good worker, got good performance reviews, really helped his firm a lot. But one day, 3 years ago, he went to work, and while he was, planning his schedule, his meetings, his pitches, he received a message from his boss asking him to come and see her. And he went into his boss's office, and he noticed that she didn't make eye contact with him. And she said, Michael, as you know, the industry is in kind of a decline. We've had to make some hard choices. And Michael said at that point, it was like everything happened in slow motion for him. And he said, I had heard stories of other people who had lost their jobs, been laid off. This has happened to some of our colleagues. It wasn't a complete surprise, but until it actually happened to me, I had no idea what it felt like. And someone from HR came in, and they gave him a box, and he had to pack up his things and, leave right away. And on the way home, he called his wife, Mary Ruth, and he said, honey, I'm sure it's going to be okay, but I'm just letting you know I lost my job today. Everything was okay for Michael in the end, but not in the way he first expected. So Michael thought, okay, this is a shock, but I'll regroup, and I will just get another job. And so he started trying to line up interviews, talk to his colleagues and former colleagues. He used LinkedIn. He did all the things he was supposed to do. And he got some interviews, but what he discovered pretty quickly was he wasn't the only one looking for work, first of all. And second of all, because his industry was in a decline, there weren't really any companies that were hiring. So Michael began to get a little discouraged. And one day, a friend of his who owned a furniture store called him up. And his friend said, I know this is kind of random, but I have a truckload of mattresses I don't want. Maybe you could take these and sell them, one at a time on Craigslist or eBay or something. So Michael called Mary Ruth again, and he said, honey, it's a long story, but is it okay if I buy some mattresses? And she said, okay, whatever, Michael. So Michael buys the mattresses, but instead of selling them through Craigslist, Michael had this other idea. While he had been driving around to all these fruitless job interviews, he had noticed a car dealership that went out of business. So Michael contacted the developer, thinking that he could probably rent that space very cheaply because there weren't any other car dealerships, coming to town during this economy. So he was able to get this space, and Michael didn't know anything about running a mattress store. His impression was that mattress stores were kind of high-pressure, seedy places. You didn't really want to go to them. So he decided to create an unconventional mattress shop. And he made it a family-friendly space where people could bring their kids, and there was a play area, and there was like a coffee area. And then Michael started the world's first mattress delivery by bicycle service, which you can look up on YouTube. It's very popular, bringing mattresses all over town. And this was 2.5 years ago, and now Mattress Law is a $1 million a year business. And I talked with Michael recently, right before the book came out, and he said, if someone had said to me a couple years ago that I'd be running a mattress shop, I never would have believed it at all. But I really love what we're doing, and we're really making a difference in our community, and the whole family's involved, and I feel like I'm actually, creating security, for myself through this. And the other thing he said was, that day that I got laid off, it was a shock. It was bad, but it turned into probably the best thing that ever happened to me. So I'm so glad that happened. That caused this, transition. And as I traveled the world, interviewed lots of different people, I heard a lot of stories like Michael's. And they didn't all involve, being laid off or fired or something, that difficult. But in most cases, they did involve, the person kind of stumbling into their business project, or not necessarily beginning with a, hugely strategic plan. They were just kind of, pursuing an opportunity and seeing where it led. And so I learned to kind of alter the questions that I ask people in response to this phenomenon. So I talked with Susanna Conway in England, and Susanna was a former journalist. She was also a photographer, and at one point she decided to create a photography course, at first, just for her friends and family, and then everyone signed up that she knew. And she wasn't a famous blogger. She didn't have, thousands of followers on Twitter or Google+. But she did have a Facebook account, and she offered, her course to anyone who was connected with her, and everyone signed up. And Susanna ended up creating, a $90,000 income, out of this project, which was more than she had made as a journalist. And I talked to her and said, was there anything that you didn't foresee when you were starting up? And she said, I didn't know I was starting up. I just thought I was doing something for fun, and everyone liked it. And I ended up creating this, business model around it. And then I talked with Benny Lewis, who's originally from Ireland, and Benny is now a full-time professional language hacker who travels the world learning foreign languages and teaching people through this method he's devised. And at the end of one of our conversations, I said, is there anything else I should know about your business? And he said, yes, please stop calling it a business. I'm just having the time of my life. I'm just doing something that I really love to do, but I found a way to connect that with something that's desired by the marketplace, with something that other people also value enough to pay for. And that's how, he's able to make a good living. And one way or another, everyone that we focused on in the study and everyone who's in the book, as well as many of the people in the broader community that I'm fortunate to work with, they've all found a way to kind of merge that question of passion and skill with the question of usefulness. With the idea of making something that not only they're excited about, but also other people are excited about and willing to pay for. And they found out how to do that in different ways. There's a story about a guy who's a full-time CFO for a university in Virginia. And he likes his job. He has no plans to leave. He's relatively happy there, but he's also been very passionate about travel. And he and his wife have often traveled first class or business class around the world using their frequent flyer miles. And for years, he always helped his colleagues with this. His colleagues would ask him, I want to go to Paris with my wife. Can you help me? And he did this for free. And then 2 years ago, he decided, kind of on a whim, to create a very, very basic website offering this as a service for anyone else who wanted help booking their frequent flyer tickets. And he said, if you have miles and you're not sure how to use them, I'll advise you on your itinerary. I'll even phone the airline for you. Whatever you want, we'll make sure you have a good trip. And long story short, 2 years on, this is now a $100,000 a year side business. And so Gary Leff, this guy, still works as a CFO, but for about 1 hour a day, he operates this business that brings in $100,000 a year. And Gary says, I like my job. I have no plans to leave, but it's actually a very good feeling to go to work because you want to go to work, as opposed to going to work because you have to go to work, And he said, it is a good job, but if something were to ever change, then I have this security that we've established on the side, and I could go full-time with this. So people, applied this model in different ways. Some after losing their job, some continuing in their job, some making a gradual transition, but again, all in pursuit of freedom. And they all did so, for the most part, without spending a lot of money. Almost everyone in the book spent less than $1,000. About half of the stories are $100 or less. I think the average startup cost was something like $432. But we decided that $432 startup didn't sound as good as $100 startup, so we went with that. But the whole point is not a lot of money, not a lot of special skills or skills that couldn't be otherwise acquired. Last story, I talked with Sarah Young in Portland, Oregon, who opened a yarn shop at the height of the recession. So she opened this retail business in a nice location just as everything else was closing down. And Sarah didn't have a lot of business experience, and so I asked her, I said, what were you thinking, in doing this? You weren't an entrepreneur. And she said, well, I wasn't an entrepreneur, but I was a shopper. And I knew what I wanted, and it didn't exist. And I thought I wasn't the only one. And so that's why I decided to create Happy Knits. And some of you may have seen the video book trailer for the $100 Startup. And in that trailer, Sarah is there in her store, and she tells the story of her first $1,000 day. She tells the story of making $1,000 for the first time and calling her dad on the phone and saying, Dad, we had a $1,000 day at the store. And she talks about just how empowering that felt. Well, we made that trailer a few months ago. And right before the book came out, I went back to her and said, are there any updates? And she said, well, we just had this big festival. We had lots of knitters come to town, and we had our first $10,000 day. So Happy Knits continues to grow. It has 5 employees now, and is doing very well. So again, I share all these stories, in the book and in the talk and through our other work, with the goal of inspiring readers to take action. And as I said in the beginning, I think it's important to define your own success with any project, whether it's a book or a business or anything else, as opposed to someone else defining that success for you. And so in the case of the $100 startup, I think the book will be successful, if it does a couple of things. And that first thing is inspiration combined with action. I hope that people will read the book and say, not only it was a good book, but I hope they read it and say, I read this and then I went and then took action on it. And I started my own little micro business, or I improved the one I had, or I helped someone else with theirs. I really hope that that inspiration will be combined with action, because I talk a lot about freedom. And the question I would have to all of us, or to anyone who's watching, is, do you have enough freedom in your life? And are you doing most of what you love most of the time? All of us have things that we have to do from time to time, and that's okay. But most of the time, are you doing something that you find meaningful, that's challenging and rewarding? And then, because freedom and responsibility are correlated, are you making the world a better place? Are you giving enough? Do you feel like you're doing enough for yourself and for others? The second thing that I hope for is education for all those people who want to start something but don't know what those next steps are. The book has lots of examples and checklists and case studies and one-page business plans and promotion plans. Again, just kind of helping people take those next steps. And then the third and final thing that I hope will come out of the book is I hope it will create a sense of urgency among those who read it, because we do live in this remarkable, beautiful age where we're all connected, and we can come together today, but we can also go and reach tens of thousands of people all over the world based on shared ideals and shared values, and that I think is very unique, because micro-entrepreneurship in different ways has always existed since the beginning of commerce. That's micro-entrepreneurship is not new. I used to live in Sierra Leone, and I would drive my Land Rover in the interior of the country and go to the village. And in West Africa, almost everyone is an entrepreneur, because everyone is, buying and selling and responsible for their own well-being, and there is no formal economy for the most part. But the difference is, in West Africa, you can pretty much only buy and sell, in the village with your neighbors or with people in a very small circle for the most part. But all of us have the chance to connect with people, all over the world based on those shared ideals or values or worldview, and I think that's very unique. And so I like something that Steve Jobs said before his death. He said, your time is limited, so don't waste it living someone else's life. And as I worked on the book and talked with everyone whose stories in the book, I found that those stories were testaments, to that ideal, testaments to the idea that we can do something that we love. It can make the world a better place. We can earn a good income from it, but we can, pursue things that are meaningful most of the time. And I'm really grateful to be here at Google today. And thank you so much, Rachel, for arranging this. And thanks to all of you, both here and elsewhere, for sharing this space with me. Thanks. So, should we do some questions? Yes, Rachel.
You did plant me on.
I didn't.
So can you talk about from your pool of applicants in the survey, people who either dropped out of college or high school, what is the ratio there? Did you find trends and people who pop on their own?
Yeah, great question. Yeah, of course. So the question is people who dropped out of college or high school versus those who stayed, and were there trends in terms of the people who were in the case study? I think it was quite varied. There were a lot of people who did have advanced education. There were other people who had very little higher education. So I'm not sure if there was a trend. I guess if there was a trend, it was a trend toward independent learning of some form, a trend towards risk-taking. And again, earlier I talked about risk and kind of define that a little bit differently, because I don't necessarily think entrepreneurs are risk-takers or mavericks. But I would say that in a lot of the people that we talked with, there was more of a history of international travel, for example, more of a history of maybe living in more than one place, for example, maybe just being exposed to different ideals. But within the education itself, I would say there were all kinds of people. There were high school dropouts to PhDs who, left their field to do something else.
Along the same lines, were there any trends with regards to, say, people like the mattress story who did it out of necessity versus the frequent flyer story where he was just sort of doing it as a side hobby?
Yeah, great question. So was there a trend in terms of people making this switch out of necessity, like the person who was laid off versus the person who was kind of deliberate and staying in the job and establishing the side income? I would say it was more common for people to make a transition out of a transition. And I would say it's more common for people to be faced with a change or to have some kind of change imposed upon themselves and then to make that change. And that's because you have to, right? You have this imperative. And so it creates, it creates a dramatic story, and it's interesting. But what I find in some ways is almost more interesting is those people who don't have that imperative, but then kind of take it upon themselves to go and establish the side income. So we had both sides. I think the related question is sometimes for those people who are in a job and no plans to leave the job for a while, but they do want to establish something on their own, what do they do? And I tend to find that a lot of those people kind of remain in paralysis because everything's going okay. And so everything's going okay and they're busy because we're all busy. And I do feel it's good for those who want to create this side income or side project. I do feel it's good to be more active about that and to focus more on action than planning. Almost no one in the study had a 60-page business plan. Almost no one in the study, borrowed money from the bank. There was a couple of exceptions, out of 1,000 stories. But almost everyone just kind of bootstrapped and found a way to get to market quickly. So regardless of the situation, I would say that the lesson is the same.
Question about kind of choosing the right idea. I think that I'm young, just out of college last year, and I think a lot of my peers in college and even now are talking about trying to start our own business, but finding that idea that really resonates with us as well as others. I think that there was a line you were speaking to about finding your passion and doing something that no longer is a job, no longer feels like a job. But you also have the example early on about the mattress salesman, and that doesn't seem to be his passion. It wasn't like
Correct.
One morning,
Correct.
I want to sell mattresses. So where's that line about the market opportunity, about your passion?
Where's that line about the market opportunity and your passion? You said a few other things, but I'm just going to kind of go off that point. So the whole thing about following your passion, there was a survey on a blog I read recently, and the question was, what is the most overrated phrase that you see online? And follow your passion was like number 1 or number 2. It's really fascinating because there's like two sides to this. Not everything that we're passionate about is going to make a good business model. And in fact, there's lots of things that we're excited about or passionate about that no one else is going to care about enough to value. I said in the book, I used to be very passionate about playing video games. And I was a really good Halo player, but no one came along and offered me a check, to do that, right? I had to find a way to create value in my business like everyone else. So not every passion can be monetized. However, I think when you look at successful people, certainly everyone in the $100 startup model, but almost not, I don't say every, but a lot of successful entrepreneurs that they have followed their passion, right? They have done something that they're excited about. But just as with those pursuing the smaller model, they have found a way to make it useful and to connect with people and deliver something that's valuable. So in terms of the mattress guy, no, he wasn't passionate about mattresses per se. I guess what he discovered is that he was passionate about community. And he was passionate about small business and the role that his shop could play in that, and doing the fun things like delivering the mattresses on the bicycle, and just kind of making business fun. So in terms of ideas, which you mentioned earlier, one thing that's helpful if you're trying to figure out which skill do I have or which passion do I have that could also be interesting to other people, so like the frequent flyer tickets as opposed to the playing Halo, one thing that's helpful is to focus on the questions that people ask you, because people probably ask you a certain number of questions about specific topics frequently. And if you think about, what is it that people always ask me about, that is often a sign that you're a perceived authority in something, and also that information is valued and desirable. So with the frequent flyer guy, he discovered that his colleagues kept asking him, how do you do this? And this whole thing is confusing to me, and when I call the airlines, I don't get good information. So he would, explain that and go into it in detail. And then finally he figured out that most people don't actually want to do that themselves. They just want to have the outcome. So he was able to create a business out of that. So I would go back to passions and skills and then think about, which of those are then useful and interesting to other people. And the same was true with Benny Lewis, the language hacking guy. He was passionate about learning languages, and he describes himself, and in fact I mention it as a full-time language hacker. But essentially, he's not being paid to learn languages. He's being paid to help other people do that. So that's also a key distinction. And Rachel mentioned, I'm on this quest to visit every country in the world. Every once in a while I read these blog posts that say, Chris Guillebeau is paid to travel. I'm not really paid to travel. I'm glad that people like the blog and, they might enjoy it, but no one pays me to travel. I have to create a specific business model. Thank you. Yes, hi. Yeah, very good question. Were any of the case studies about nonprofits? And if so, how does that differ from other kinds of businesses? So for the most part, in this study, I'm focusing on for-profit small businesses because, again, the whole goal is providing freedom and independence for that entrepreneur or micro-entrepreneur. There were a lot of people who then, created that freedom for themselves and then used the time that they had or the resources that they had, to devote more to their nonprofit causes as well. But what I was interested in, probably more than strictly nonprofits, I was interested in kind of those who took a hybrid approach, which we're seeing more and more, like with Kiva or Tom's Shoes or something like that, where it's like a for-profit company or organization with a cause or something that's kind of merging the two things. So there were a couple of stories about that. One of them was Selena and Kari Cuff, who I believe they live in Los Angeles, and they had traveled a bit on the continent of Africa. And in South Africa specifically, South Africa is known for its wine industry and great wine, but due to all the effects of apartheid, most of the vineyard owners were white South Africans. And there was a very small number of vineyards that were owned by black South Africans. And so Selena and Kari started this business called Heritage Link Brands that imported wine from South Africa from black-owned vineyards. And so they basically created a business around this. I think it's a low seven-figure business now. They're importing wines to the U.S. and I think Canada and probably some other places too. So it's a business, but it's a business with a deliberate social cause, and it's a business to uplift a population that wasn't previously served well. So I was interested in the approaches of combining both profit and nonprofit. Thank you. Yeah.
Chris, I have a group of friends that follow you very closely, actually, myself one of them as well. We were chatting the other night after having all kind of read your book, and there was a topic that came up recently that had to do with just the fear of kind of having great jobs and having that unconventional desire to do something different and leave the jobs. He actually worked for a large corporation, felt that wasn't enough, then went to like a rock star startup, and now he's still in that situation where it's not driving that freedom that he's looking for.
Right.
And he was coming up with just, kind of these reasons as to what he wanted to do and how he wanted to do it. And the thing that was holding him back was, what do I do if in a month or two I can't pay my rent? Because I want to walk in tomorrow and I want to say, I'm done. And I want to be able to just start my business and go for it. But that fear is something that constantly holds him back. And I know that's probably something you hear all the time.
I do hear that all the time. And so the question was about fear. And if you have a good job, but you have this desire for freedom, what do you do and how do you reconcile these things? And you have a good salary, and but you have this desire to do something different. I do hear that all the time. I often hear from people who write in, especially from large companies, Microsoft and other places. Never here, of course. But it's phrased almost exactly like that. I have this desire to do something, but I have this, and sometimes it's from people who have families or other real responsibilities and obligations. I think the wrong advice to tell those people is quit your job. now. Quit your job, just go for it. It's going to be okay. I think that's the wrong advice. But I would also say, I mentioned paralysis earlier. What often happens is they get stuck because they can only envision two alternatives. They can only envision, staying in this job, which may have served me, for a time, and maybe it's okay, but I'm ready to do something different. And, this general idea of freedom or working, for myself. But they don't really see, how to get from here to there, and they don't imagine all the points in between. So I would say to that person, why can't you start now, while you have this job, and why can't you begin taking those steps now? Because that fear is real, but there's nothing to inhibit you from taking action now. And people often ask sometimes, they say, well, I've got this really busy job, and I'm working 50 or 60 hours a week, and I have no time. Well, a couple of things. One, we all make time for what's important to us. So, if this is important to you, then you can make some time. But I also think it's an advantage when you have limited time to pursue your, micro startup, because then you can only do things that matter. And if you have 40 hours a week to work on it, you can probably think of all kinds of things that are irrelevant to the business model, right? But a business essentially is just three things. It's a product or a service, a group of people willing to pay for it, and a means of getting paid. So if you focus on those three things, and go from a general business idea to a specific offer, as soon as possible. There's a one-page consulting guide, in the book, how to get your website up, one-page promotion plan, what to do every day to get the word out. If you just start that now, I feel like that is so much healthier, and I feel like it generates more security. And if you had something that's making even $1,000 a month or something, then I know that's not a lot of money, but it's much easier usually to grow a business that's making some amount of money than it is to start it from the beginning. And so I feel like one of the ways of dealing with that fear is to start now and to have something. So then maybe you don't have the $100,000 a year side income like the frequent flyer guy, but if you have something that's so much more easier to envision the possibilities, as opposed to just saying, yeah, go for it. Let me quit my job at, the greatest company in the world or something to go and do something that's kind of uncertain. And some people do that, but, maybe it's easier to do both for a while. That's great. Anything else? Are we good?
I was going to ask if you could briefly touch on how you went from your first book to the idea for this book. It sounds like much of the messaging is the same. I haven't read this one yet, but I was wondering how you sort of went from that one to one that was more focused, I guess, on taking action and creating a side business.
Okay, so how did I go from book number 1, which was The Art of Nonconformity, to book number 2, The $100 Startup? What was the process? So they're actually quite different. The first book was much more general. It's much more about worldview, a lot of stories of like challenging authority, and some more information about travel, which this book doesn't really touch on. And so the $100 Startup is much more specifically focused on this idea of establishing freedom, through a micro business. And it's also based on, I guess I would also say it's based a lot more on data and on this study. And that came about in part from the first book tour. I went to every state and every province in Canada, and along the way I just met a lot of people who fit this unexpected entrepreneur model. And I heard a lot of stories, and I started getting more email. And so that's when I thought we need to tell this story well. And so my main goal, in writing the book was to tell these stories well, hopefully, to do honor to them, but then to provide that narrative or that blueprint that other people could follow. So it came about mostly organically, just as I traveled and as I heard from different people that I'm connected with. That's great.
Just one last question. Sure. And I haven't read the book yet, but a lot of the stories that you mentioned were very individual. And this person had an idea or this last situation.
Right.
What about in kind of industries and ideas that require more collaboration? So in ever connected world,
Right.
Things like for me, it would be very difficult for me. Somebody could do much more efficiently in another part of the world. And do you have any examples along leveraging those kinds of companies at scale and partnerships in general?
Great. So most of the stories that we've touched on are fairly individual, and wondering about partnerships and opportunities to leverage knowledge and connectivity. That's a great question. I would say I probably have my own individual bias towards solopreneurs and those people who just kind of establish things on their own. One, because that's what I know. I don't know the big startup model. I don't know that traditional business model that we talked about in the beginning. I just know, my own history of always being self-employed, of always kind of hustling to, make my own way. And so that's the world in which I'm most comfortable with, and those are the stories that I'm probably best at telling and analyzing. I would say, though, that, everyone that we looked at in the book, we also had a number of partnerships, lots of husband and wives or couples operating their business together, or two business partners operating it together. But I really wasn't looking at a model of 10 people or more than that, building an actual company. So in terms of the partnerships, there's some information about partnerships, about how that works and how it does, and about using the strengths of one person to, remedy the weaknesses of the other. But for the most part, I guess I'm much more interested in that individual focus of freedom, just because that's what I know. Great. Thanks again, guys. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris.
Thank you.